Um, I think that the question is a really, really important one because it challenges the naturalization and universalization of the concept of religion. But I think it's also, at some level, a problematic one because we need to think more clearly about what we mean by religion because the term itself has been defined in so many different ways throughout its long and mostly Christian history.
I think, like Richard, that it's important to make the critique, which is that it's been a function of a translated term in a colonial context, and that in itself is deeply problematic and should be thought through in new ways, especially if we're going to be thinking about the study of religion in India, in setting up programs and departments in India. The critique from within a post-colonial context is extremely important. But I also think that as most governments, and certainly democracies, especially one like India, also provide protective mechanisms for people who are classified uh, by means of their religion. Religion is also a strategic category politically that we can't ignore. Religion is also a strategic category in the university. If we want it to be studied as a legitimate subject, we have to say there's a there there. We have to say that it exists, at least provisionally, and that puts us in a bit of a double bind. On the one hand, we're aware of the history of the term, how contingent the use of the term actually is, how impossible it is to translate outside of the Christian context, and yet we still use it to get our work done and to create fora such as departments to study these practices and to protect people who have no other means of being protected in states.
Okay.
Can
So
I,
yeah.
can I come back on? There's another point I want to make about that, which is I think the question, are there native religions in India, is predisposing us to answer yes or no. And I would say that because religion is essentially an interpretive category, a category that has a great deal of baggage, that as Laurie has been suggested, it's not a question of yes or no, it becomes more a question of the implications of saying yes or no, and in different strategic contexts, one may have to give different answers.
That's right. So the second query that you had was, is it a relevant question for today? And I think the answer is it's very relevant insofar as every discussion about religion is going to involve two responses in India. One is religion isn't ours. We have Hindu Dharma, we have Islamic Sharia, whatever else we have. It is something that was imposed upon us as an idea. At the same time, our Constitution, Ambedkar, and many others involved in that state-building project understood religion as a category that now has legal force. And so no matter what, you're in a double bind. And so in my view, the more we can train ourselves and educate ourselves to speak informatively and clearly and cogently about that double bind and how we might move our way through it is a very important thing to do. So I see every conference like this as having relevance insofar as it creates a different moment in public discourse that can have a kind of function that that would be possible for the larger public to think with a new vocabulary about the study of religion.
Yeah, I would say that because I see the category of religion as being one of, if not the central category in the West's own sense of self-identity, that exploring and unpacking the question of how universal it might be is an important part in exploring contemporary geopolitical structures and their normalization. For instance, in very broad terms, I would say that the West itself, not a monolithic entity, but for the sake of the discussion, has defined itself through the category of religion in two main ways. Firstly, either it's been true religion in relation to either lack of religion or false religion, which has been a predominant way in which the West has defined itself in the kind of Christian period of European civilization. But more recently, as the West has come to define itself as secular, that is not religious, or at least with religion demarcated in a private sphere, religion has come to function as the category through which any speaking back to the West occurs. And for me, this even speaks to the realities of 9/11, because to be able to respond to Western power and be heard outside the discourse of religion is almost impossible. But it is possible to challenge that, and I hope that the kinds of discussions we're having at this conference will go some way to kind of relativizing and challenging some of those constructs.
And I think your final question was about making it relevant for people today, getting the word out. Will challenge the status quo, right? I think if you think about the status quo as a kind of public discourse around religion which has two characteristics, one of which is it's an either-or game all the time, and you either are religious or you're secular, there's no in-between. You're either a Hindu or anti-Hindu, there's no in-between, etc. And I think, unfortunately, the media contributes to this in wanting a good story which has an either-or component to it. I think insofar as that kind of either-or property to public discourse around religion can be challenged, it's good to do that. I think scholars need to work much better with media in presenting nuanced versions and more complex versions of what religions are all about in India, as well as Richard was saying, in the global economic structures that we now exist in. I also think that we lack a sense of humor and irony and an ability to critique our own traditions, which irony and senses of humor are all about. And my version of the challenge for us in interreligious relationships in the 21st century is to be able to feel secure enough collectively within our religious traditions to critique publicly ourselves. And that's a very hard thing to do, but I think conferences like this can go a long way to making that happen. I'm not expecting that the media and popular discourse around religion will ever look like academic discourse. I think that's not appropriate at all. But I do think that the scholars that are here at this conference are very cognizant of the way that local cultures think about religious traditions. The Center for the Study of Local Cultures is one of our sponsors. And that means that, mutatis mutandis, that popular discourse around religion is significant, is important, and something we should engage with, both as intellectuals involved in that discourse as well as something to study. So the two things, one, creating a different sense of irony about religious traditions in public discourse, and moving away from the either-or kind of modes. I think an excellent example of a magazine that does that beautifully is Outlook. The stuff that they do on religion has always been very nuanced, and I hope that Outlook could be a model for other media folks in the future.
I'm hopeful about the prospects of this conference, although there are essentially two myths, I think, that academics spin about themselves and that people spin about academics. One of them is a power fantasy, that academics are like the intellectual driving force of cultures. And there are obvious examples of heroic individuals where that's been the case, but generally speaking, I think that is a fantasy. But the other one is that academics live in the ivory tower as such, in the sense that they are not part of and not connected to wider popular cultural shifts. And I don't think that's true either. So I think what's going on at this conference, if it's treated as an isolated event, will not have a great deal of impact outside of specific, very narrow academic debates. But insofar as it taps into some very important cultural shifts that are going on and questions that are being asked, which I think are related to the aftershock of the end of European colonialism and the fracturing of certain certainties in that, then I hope that will have an impact. But I would say finally, though, that religion is produced in all kinds of institutions that have a great deal of power, not just obviously in ecclesiastical context, but in political circles, in the media, and frankly, academics don't really have control of the microphone in that context. And so, I would be slightly reticent about making grand claims about our significance in that context.